Welcome to a new talk, the main stage here at PyData. We have a super exciting talk now. We are going to become expert at choosing KPIs metric. And we have Dror and Alon here to host us. So Dror is a data scientist lead at Meta. And Alon is a data scientist lead at Spotify. So yeah, thank you for being here and let's give them some applause.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a nice break and got a nice snack. I sure did, so welcome to our talk. Thank you for choosing us. We'll talk about power users, long-tail users, and everything in between, or how to measure metrics, how to choose meaningful metrics and KPIs for product strategy. As Pierre said, I'm Alon. I'm a data scientist at Spotify, and I'm visiting from the UK.
I'm Dror. I'm a data scientist tech lead for Meta, based here in Amsterdam.
So let's see what the agenda is for today. We'll start by setting the scene with a few brief introductions into the data science role and responsibilities. Then we'll spend the majority of the time talking about the different hats a data scientist needs to wear. And after that, we'll conclude and open the floor for some questions. So without further ado, let's jump in. The insights teams in tech organizations, and not just, are very, very varied. There are all sorts of different job roles, and people complement each other in their skills and abilities and the disciplines they come from and represent. This is a partial list. Your mileage may vary, but roughly these are 5 of the big categories. And if you remember the opening remarks this morning, we saw that while data scientist is the most common job role for attendees at PyData, it's not the majority of attendees. And so it's good to keep that in mind when we are talking, what we mean when we're talking about data scientists. We are this slice of the population. And data scientists come in all different flavors. I try to list the main ones here, but it really is very varied. And Dror and I belong to this bench of product data scientist, and Dror will say what that means.
Yeah, so why do companies even pay product analytics? It's, I think, not clear for anyone. But while ML engineers actually build stuff, right, and ranking models, etc., the things that we try to help companies do is to make better decisions. In order to make better decisions, you need data. And you mostly need causal inference. You need to try and understand what the effect will be of certain policies. There's this nice framework that we use at Meta, which I really like, called Understand, Identify, and Execute, which talks about the 3 different pillars of how you build a product. At the first stage, which is the understand stage, you try to get the lay of the land, see what you want to do, and figure out what direction you want to take, and sort of where do you want to take your company or organization or team towards. This is the part where we as product analytics data scientists try and define North Star metrics for our teams. And we will focus the majority of the talk today on that. How do you choose the right North Star metrics? After you figure out what it is that you're trying to optimize for as a team, you then try to identify concrete opportunities to get you towards that direction. And after you've identified and prioritized the opportunities that you want to pursue, you then go to execute and make sure that you're executing as planned, and that you've exhausted the opportunities that you were able to identify. Maybe another way to think about this is we do stuff in hindsight, which is basically trying to be reactive, figuring out what's going on in the world, and then how do we want to act upon it. And we do things in foresight, figuring out where we want to go to, and then what would be the best path towards that. And whether if you're reactive or proactive, you have to be active. In order to be active, you need to be making decisions. In order to make the right decisions, you want to utilize data. So how do you do that in practice? What are the different hats that we wear when we're coming up with these metrics? So the bulk of the talk is going to talk about the 3 hats that we wear as product analytics data scientists. First one is the statistician's hat. This is like the science part of data science. And this is making sure that really the data is valid and that we stand behind it. Then we have the business. Yes, we have the business hat, which is sort of the more soft skills part of the operation where you try to go beyond the statistics and into the actual product strategy and the management of the team. And then lastly, we have the practitioner's hat about how you take the theoretical aspect and then translate them into actual things that you can use. So I will now hand it over to Alon to start and walk us through the statistician's hat.
Thank you. So we identified 8 key properties that metrics should have. Obviously, it's a wish list. Your mileage may vary. You will not necessarily be able to get all of them. We will cover the first 6, and the other 2 are reserved for PyData Plus members. Number 8 will shock you. You can take photos. We also have all of that already on GitHub, and slides and video will be added a bit later, but the key ingredients of this talk are already available on the link that we'll have later on. So when we are talking about the different properties, we are going to use this silly framework of good idea, bad idea. Dror and I were kids in the 90s, so if you know this reference, we really like you. If you don't, we still like you, but play along with us. And we'll begin with clear and simple. Who here knows what a Net Promoter Score is? Oh dear. Hopefully everybody feels the same as me about NPS, but for the few of you that didn't raise their hands, NPS is this measure to see how happy users are with your product. And so you've seen these before. You've got an email or pop-up saying, on a scale of 0 to 10, an 11-point scale is already a good thing, a good way to start. How likely are you to recommend this thing to a friend? And then you collect the answers of different users, and you label them. So anyone who gave between 0 and 6 is a detractor, 9 and 10 are promoters, and those in between, the 7 and 8, are neutrals. I should say that, as I mentioned, I'm from the UK. In the UK, nobody gives anything 9 or a 10. Like 8 is the English 10. After doing that, you completely ignore the neutrals. You shrink all of the data to 2 groups, detractors and promoters. And the Net Promoter Score is a proportion of promoters minus the proportion of detractors times 100. So I think it's fairly clear that it's not clear and not simple and not easy to do or convey. But there are other issues with that as well. It doesn't really tell you a lot. On the right, you can see 2 different distributions. Both of them give you an NPS of 10, right? And I would argue that the blue distribution on the right is actually a very good story. Most of the people gave 7 and 8. And they are really happy, which means they are fairly happy, fairly content with your product. Some gave 9. And even those that don't like your product or aren't as keen on it gave it a 6, which is still pretty good. And then on the other hand, it has exactly the same NPS score as the one person that gave a 0 and the one person that gave a 10 combined. So it's very convoluted. I'm not a fan, as you can imagine. And so I would suggest a better idea, which would be 2 things: customer satisfaction surveys, and you need to overlay it with retention and engagement metrics, because just because somebody is using your product doesn't mean they like it. Another key ingredient is for it to be measurable, reliable, and accurate. Obviously, if I conduct a measure today and I conduct it tomorrow and get vastly different numbers just because, that's not very useful. Or if I report numbers monthly or quarterly and I run the same calculation and I show that the numbers in history somehow miraculously changed, that's not very usable. But there are also other issues like selection effects and survivorship bias. So for example, in the NPS example, you can assume or suspect that the users that will give you are more likely to reply are people that are either very happy or very annoyed with your product. And so a better idea could be for example, the customer satisfaction survey after debiasing. Before we dive into that, I'll just share an obligatory slide and give you a second to read it. And with that, Dror will tell us what we can do about it.
Yeah, so this is just a quick shameless plug for a new library out by the core data science team at Meta. Those are the smart folks with a PhD in statistics. They've put out a Python package for debiasing your data sets. It's optimized for surveys. They also published like a 44-page long article that gives a really good survey of the lay of the land of packages available in Python and in R, and also of the different methods being used. It also includes a tutorial. I've been using the internal version for quite a while for debiasing data sets around experimentation, et cetera. It's super easy to use, and I highly recommend it. So this was like a quick word from our sponsor, and then back to our regular programming.
Cool. So the next principle is MISI, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. So we need to make sure that we represent all of our users and all of our users once, so not accidentally overweight them. So like the first part is of what can be taken care of by what Dror just said. We'll make sure that even though we may have some extremes to who chooses to answer the survey, then we can kind of rebalance it to be more representative of the user base. But we also need to keep in mind that we don't want to over-represent anyone. We want to have an understanding of all of our user base combined. The next principle is timely. And basically what we mean by that is that good enough now is better than perfect later. So you may have seen retention charts before. Basically, we see the vertical axis is the % of users that were retained, and then the horizontal axis is for time, so it could be days, months, weeks. And what you would see in many cases is this shape of rapid decline in the first couple of periods and then a linear trend afterwards. So once you've made it through some threshold, the reasons people leave are because of like death and marriage. Death if their device dies and they can't log back in, or the person dies, or marriage. So if two people have a Netflix account and then they move to live in the same flat, they are going to downsize. But other than that, the trend is pretty much linear. And so instead of waiting 12 months to get 12 months data for retention, for example, you can look at the first 3, 4, extrapolate, and know that where you headed, what's working better than many other options, for example. This is a cute one. This is one of my favorites. Obviously, it kind of seems like table stakes, but still. It needs to be informative and actionable. And a few years ago, Bing Search changed the search algo. And they saw in an experiment that there was an uptick of 10% in queries per user and 30% in revenue per user, which is phenomenal, right? We should be lucky to have 1/10 of that. So there was a problem. They had a bug that degraded the search results. So people searched more because they couldn't find good results, and they spent more time on the website because they couldn't find what they were looking for. So the problem is that the action taken from this metric alone is to let's degrade the search results for everyone and make more money. So I would say that a better idea would be to also track task success, for example, in retention. You can have short-term wins, but long-term fails. And one other thing to keep in mind is standardization. That would also help with all of the issues that I mentioned before. And basically, through playbooks and tools, we can kind of speak the same language inside the data science org and make sure that things that we do and take for granted are also things that other people in the company do and take for granted. A common example is, for example, retention. If you needed to calculate monthly retention, I'm sure that some of you calculated it with 30-day windows, whereas other people in your company calculated retention with 28-day windows. So that's one example. And on the right, there's my shameless plug for Confidence, which is a platform we'll release soon for experimentation. So just to sum things up, these are the different properties that I discussed. And as I mentioned, you can already go to our GitHub and see all of these in person. And with that, the second hat, the MBA hat, is going to Dror.
Yeah, okay, so we have this metrics, it's sound, we stand behind it, we believe that the numbers make sense. This is not going to be sufficient on its own to make a team successful, right, and to actually drive business success. So how do we do that? I wanted to cover like 4 topics here. One, I want to briefly mention KPIs and OKRs. I'm sure that you've heard of it. People tend to use it interchangeably in the industry, but I want to go over what they are. And then I want to talk over some other principles to keep in mind. So very basically, KPIs, key performance indicators, OKRs, objectives and key results. I won't go through they are like nuancedly different. It's mostly a question of how stable your environment is and how sure you are that you're going to continue to try to do the same thing over and over for a longer period. But what both of them have in common is that they're both trying to get you to define measurable, quantifiable, measurable ways that will be clear to tell you if you're going in the right direction or not. Now, you can do it for a variety of directions that you might want to go down, and I'm sure that in companies, and the larger the company you work in, the more directions you will try to pull at. One of those KPIs or OKRs, or let's say, if not one, then up to 3, has to be defined as your North Star metric, okay? The good thing about a North Star is that there's only one of them, and that's how you know the actual north, right? So same thing here. You want to help your organization figure out what's the North Star metric that everyone wants to prioritize. This means that when everyone are going to make multiple decisions throughout the day in different teams about infra and front end and back end and whatnot and promotions, everyone's going to try to optimize for the same thing. And once everyone agrees that this is the thing that we all measure together and we're all trying to optimize for, that means that we're not only going at the right direction, we're also going fast there, right? We're all focused. And that's why, as data scientists, helping your organization define and track your North Star metric is one of the most influential levers that we have on managing and actually driving strategy in the org. So what metrics do you want to track? Or how do you know what metric other companies, competitors might track? My tip here is go to quarterly reports that public companies post. Especially if you're going to interview for one, figure out what's the metrics that they're talking with stakeholders about. I guarantee you that those are metrics that everyone in the organization really cares about. And try to internalize what that metric means and how it might move. Now, I've listed some here. So Facebook and Instagram are looking at daily active users, monthly active users. Spotify is looking at paying monthly active users and ad-based monthly active users. YouTube actually had internal debates about what should be the North Star metric. After they were acquired by Google, people who came from information retrieval basically really didn't like the fact that they were trying to optimize for video watch time. The argument was, if someone is searching how to tie a tie, and we have 2 videos, one that is going to give the answer in 30 seconds, and one that is going to be really entertaining with many jokes, but it's going to take 5 minutes. We want to give the users the ability to get the information in 30 seconds. The understanding within YouTube's leadership was that YouTube is not going to be like Google in that sense. It's actually, they were trying to get the product to be entertaining, and the competition was television. So actually what they wanted was for people to view longer videos, even at the expense of watching fewer videos, right? So North Star metric, super important. The downside there is that people can always game metrics, okay? So as Alon mentioned about Bing, same story goes with YouTube. They had this re-ranking algorithm that really increased the number of videos that people were watching, but it was actually down-ranking the relevant videos, so people had to go through many videos. That's not a good thing. It is great for metrics. It's something that you can celebrate if everyone's just looking at the metrics. Another thing that we need to do as the business head people in the room is to say, okay, we're actually trying to optimize for users, not for metrics. I have a nice anecdote about the USSR and nails, but I'll keep that for the Q&A session. This is a real-world example of how do you know if something is a North Star metric for an organization? I find it helpful when Mark Zuckerberg tells the world. So if you get a chance to do that, that will probably help. Here's what Mark Zuckerberg had to say about the North Star metrics and how to think about the direction for threads after the launch. And as you can see, the idea is we're going to focus on retention first, as Alon mentioned earlier. We don't want to focus on acquisition. The first thing is to get the basics right and make sure that we have a retentive product in place. After we figure that out and we find product market fit, then we can go to try and expand the community, get more acquisition, and only after that will we talk about revenue. Keep in mind that different segments of your users drive different metrics. Bottom line, if you plot any metric in the real world, it is likely going to have this power law or long tail distribution where the mode of the users will have very low values of the metric, and then you'll have a small subsegment of users that have really high value for the metric. It's not working. But the power users part, those will be the ones that really like your product. They're going to be the ones that are driving your engagement metrics. And those will be the subsegment of users that you want to focus on and understand better if you want to drive engagement. The users on the left, those are the users that are not sure that they're going to retain. They don't like the product that much. And those are the users that you want to focus on if you want to improve retention and drive growth that way.
And that's me. So let's start with the left-hand side of the slide. You've probably seen this before, the product diffusion curve. Basically, early on, it's the tech geeks, it's the early adopters, the ones that are really happy to try anything new and maybe not necessarily fully fleshed out, the beta testers and so on. And then over time, our product becomes more and more mainstream and then even late adopters. So for me, I can think about smartphone adoption, right? I was fairly early on, replaced my candy bar cell phone to a smartphone, and then over time, even my parents kind of decided that, okay, we need to change and so on, and my mom is now, you can get it off WhatsApp and kind of flickering through images. So users or the makeup of your user base will change over time, and that also is relevant because they'll change it differently. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the kind of the hype cycle diagram where, new technology, we think that, oh, it's amazing, it can do everything, it's the solution to all of our problems, and then there comes some disillusionment where, okay, maybe not, and then finally we reach some steady state that we know what's good and what we can do and what we can't do. And that also affects your metrics, right, on how people use your product and what they are trying to do with it and what are they expecting from it. So in case you're wondering how realistic this curve is, here's some recent usage stats for ChatGPT. So that's the blue line, and I bet you weren't expecting that. So to sum up, we have the 4 principles for an MBA. And I will hand it back to Dror to talk about the practitioner's hat.
Cool. So the practitioner's hat is really all about, okay, these were nice in theory, we graduated, now what do we bring to the actual business, right? Our main takeaway here is that without data, a DS would just be a person with an opinion, right? You don't have any advantage over any other partner that you're working with. But without an opinion, you're just a person with data, right? You're not really helpful in any way for the business. What you really want to have is you want to have data that you stand behind, and you also want to be opinionated about the direction that the team should go at, or the organization should go at. Not going to talk over all 8 principles. I do want to talk about some of them, but I want to call out the 3 that I won't say more about. Anyway, make sure that your organization is also prioritizing measuring the impact. This also means having a culture of experimentation. There's this tension that people feel like, oh, in order to execute well, we should just focus on making impact and not measuring it. Make sure that you incentivize people to also measure their impact. This also means invest in building the data sets that will help you come up with the insights that will help you do the understand work. And then also make sure to leverage things beyond data for being opinionated, right? So make sure to leverage product vision and UXR, et cetera. Sniff your data in order to stand behind the data, like Vicky talked about in the keynote speak. You want to be close to the data as possible. Look at raw samples. Look at things beyond the aggregated data. Look at a variety of statistics. Visualize your data. Make sure that you really understand the mechanisms and the edge cases and the null values and what causes them. This will make sure that you can really reason about the different phenomena that you're seeing. Do back of the envelope upsizing, basically use simplified assumptions. Try to figure out of the various suggestions what is going to move your North Star metric and by how much. Acknowledge when you don't really need data. When I was starting out, I assumed that more experienced data scientists are the one that can come up with more advanced ways to make predictions more accurately. And what I realized is that a lot of the time what you really gain with experience is realizing when you can do really simpler stuff that will be just as good. So if you can do some stuff based on observational data with some correction for the bias, and it will be just as good as going down the path of building this experiment for 6 months, that's probably going to be good enough. This is the framework that I kind of like to use about figuring out how much uncertainty you have around a certain direction, and then also how much complex it's going to be. And the further you are to the top right, you need stronger data evidence. If you're closer to the bottom left, you can you don't really need data. Yeah, I think I'll skip that other slide. Here's the checklist of things that we feel help you be successful as a practitioner in this role. So to summarize our takeaways, without data, you're just a person with an opinion. Make sure the stats are tight. Without an opinion, you're just a person with data. Make sure to have this strong opinion, weakly held mindset. Defining a North Star metric is one of the major leverages that we have on driving strategy. All metrics are going to have limits, so acknowledge them and make sure to focus on users and not on metrics. And lastly, remember that it's not academia, so things don't really have to be scientific. You can use simplifying assumptions, but it also can't be alchemy. So don't just use data that makes you feel like you're correct. Try to still help the data to find the limitations in your assumptions and the product directions that you're going down. These are some quick references if you want to dive deeper. Measure What Matters is like the Bible of OKRs. I highly recommend it. The Book of Why, great book about causal inference basics. And then there's this talk by Alex Schultz, who is now VP of Analytics at Meta, about how to use North Star metrics to drive growth. Okay, so that was our talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.